20 minutes in. Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I don't know why we're laughing. I'm Paul John Dykes. This is Patrick McGulk. And we're also joined, of course, by John Hughes. And we're on the 14th of January. The clock is ticking. I'm going to start off with Martin O'Neill's press conference yesterday. There was a second one, but it's behind a paywall on Celtic TV, incidentally. So, Patrick McGulk, let's start with that. What was your thoughts? What kind of vibe are you getting from Martin O'Neill at the moment when it comes to transfers?
So I sort of felt sorry for him, really, and by extension, feel sorry for every Celtic fan that's going to have to endure the rest of this window. You know, he's came in, he's sort of back to try and save the day. Came back on the 5th of January, so he's been back 9 days, 8 days as of yesterday, and he's now head of recruitment. I've said before, the manager's basically head of communication at Celtic. He's obviously head coach. Tisdale's away. Our chief scout left not long after Brendan. So it's a bit of a shambles, our recruitment department. I think he's seen a few things for the Daily Record yesterday, gave interviews to the papers as well, basically just laying out how much of a shambles it is. So when I was watching it, I'd love to say I was in disbelief, but I don't think anyone was. I think everyone knows how much of a shambles it is, and it's not just because no one's there, it's because the people that have occupied those positions of power have been incompetent for quite a while. I mean, God knows how many times we've said it on here. We've been living off Ange's first 2 windows for about 4 seasons now. And the squad has slowly been stripped for parts. And the problem with it being stripped for parts, you know, the sort of Moneyball, modern football method of trading your way up, it relies on buying in good players, not just selling your good players. You need to actually buy in other good players. So we've either waited too long to sell a player, or we've sold them and been unable to replace them. And that's why we're in the position that we are. But I mean, listen to the press conference. It's going to be a case of loan deals, isn't it? I think we all knew that, or we all had a sort of general vibe of that, even before O'Neill replaced Nancy, because our recruitment department is such a nightmare, such a disaster zone that we're just incapable of getting deals over the line. We're incapable of scouting good football players, and I mean, you've seen the links, whether they're true or not. The Rolodex is back out. Dudu Dahan is back on the phone. It's really, really desperate stuff. I mean, you're going back 10, 15 years for contacts. So it's quite pathetic from the club. But as I say, it wasn't disbelief. It wasn't unbelievable. It's entirely believable. We almost knew it was coming, but it's all, basically been confirmed by the manager. So for Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney, I mean, they must be working overtime. I feel sorry for them, but obviously I want them to do the best job that they can, because we really are in a 3-horse race at the moment. Personally, I think if we sign a good striker, I think we will just about win the league. If we don't sign a striker, it's anyone's guess. My money would probably be in Hearts, if I'm being honest. And even just looking towards, I mean, it's impossible to even plan for June onwards. But when you're looking at strikers, I think we need 2. I think you need a guy in on loan quickly just to score goals, get us over the line this season. But I think you need a guy in permanently to bed him in, to get him ready for the qualifiers. But of course, I mean, the links the last sort of 48 hours have been Bowie. Anyone that you sign permanently, I think that's a commitment, that this is a guy we're going to have up front for the qualifiers, and that is a hell of a commitment. And I don't think Kevin Bowie's that guy. I think he's a half-decent striker, obviously a good striker in the SPFL, good for Hibs this season and last season. But I don't think he's that man to take us into the qualifiers. So in an ideal world, I think we would get 2 strikers in, but we need at least 1, even if it's a loan, and it needs to be top quality. They cannot fail us again, because if we don't get a striker in, I don't even think Martin O'Neill could get us over the line this season, because another 4 or 5 months of Yamada and Kenny up front, I just don't see how we score enough goals to win the league, to be honest. So my feeling yesterday watching that interview, not quite shock, but certainly almost sorrow, and I felt quite bad for Martin.
Sorrow? I thought you meant we were in for a smile or sorrow there. Nothing would surprise me. Nothing would surprise me in this window. John, maybe every January we should just set up a kind of therapy session for the listeners to come in, because we're all the same. We're all getting up in the morning, checking out the old Celtic news now. Have we signed a striker yet? And the answer is no. Kieran Bowie's a name that's constantly been linked with us. And, I just think he's overpriced, Patrick. I think, yeah, decent addition to the squad, absolutely. But not at £6 million. But I think what's happened here is when Hibs bought the player from Fulham, there was a 40% sell-on clause. inserted into the deal. So 40% of any profit. So Hibs are looking at that saying, look, if we sell them for 3.5, we're making just over £1 million profit. They're not going to do that. So they're trying to drive the price up. Whether or not he's worth 6 is anybody's guess in this market, John. I certainly wouldn't pay that for him. We are kind of desperate, though, and that is not a good place to be, is it, John?
Aye. Well, first of all, can I just say before I forget, Frosty Fenian in the comments there, yes, it was nice to meet you, mate. Met him before the Aberdeen game, and he got a picture with me, which I think confused a lot of people standing round about us. Obviously, vast majority of them are going, who's that guy?
Who's that guy next to Frosty Fenian? Is that what they were saying?
No, anyway, it's always nice to meet the folks, and he was a lovely fella. So we met at the protest just before the Aberdeen game, and turned out that protest was quite important. In terms of going back to one point Patrick said before I address what you said, Paul John, shambles. A shambles would indicate that we had a department that was dysfunctional. What do you call it when there's no department? Right? Yeah. What's a shambles? Because there's nothing there. It's very, very clear that there's nothing there.
Yep.
Right? And this season has been just an utter revelation of all the worst things that we ever thought were happening with the club. Just one after the other, all these revelations of what is going on or not going on. And it's just getting worse and worse. And it's very clear. I jokingly said, I was quite dismissive of a guy who's saying, oh, we're starting from scratch. And I was saying, how can we be starting from scratch? Are you seriously telling me? So that would mean Tisdale's thing was an actual fraud, or they've just let him walk out the building with all of his work product? Because whether he thought the players were good or not, there would have had to be an original data set that he was working from. And then he was extrapolating and filtering those players. No. So clearly it was either a fraud or it's just a complete sham, and there's nothing beyond, an Excel spreadsheet with a couple of names on it. But either way, I don't think shambles does it justice. I think we're looking at, right now, it is, for me, it's sort of despair at how bad things are. And it's, and you can feel it from the team, the panic and the desperation. And the people we're going to be negotiating with are going to know all about it. And quite frankly, they would be right, because we are going to have to pay the asking price for whoever it is we're trying to get in here. We're not going to be in a position to negotiate the Champions League money, whether we qualify for the Champions League or not. We cannot allow Rangers to win this league and then go straight into the Champions League, which is what it looks like it would happen. We cannot allow that. The impact of this window could be generational. This could be felt for decades. And so the decisions we make here, they may be desperate, but they are necessary. We simply don't have time to pussyfoot around negotiating over a few million here or there. We are in such dire straits. And I saw this last night when people were talking about likes of Bowie and stuff like that. Oh, he's never worth that and all the rest of it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he's worth. We need to get someone in to win this league. And whether he can take us beyond that point is almost an irrelevance, right? Is he the man for the Champions League? Are any of these guys for the Champions League as it stands? I mean, again, I don't think we fully appreciate sometimes how much trouble we're in.
Yep.
So, he wouldn't be alone in being unfit for the Champions League. So, I just think we're in dire straits, and we have a very, very short time to do something about it. And by the time, there's talk of other systems being involved now, and Sean Maloney's working hard, but by the time that's implemented, this window will be nearly over. And you're not going to have time then to try and do deals. Loan deals in particular can be sort of tricky enough, because clubs can wait and see what it is that they're looking for. And Martin O'Neill made it very clear what was actually happening. Our recruitment system at the moment is Martin O'Neill sitting doing a telesales job, while the boys are out taking training. He's just got the old thing running through all the numbers, and he's just sitting there going, "Hello, can I interest you in a loan to Celtic?" So
it's like the old Celtic hotline, remember that?
That's exactly it. We can promise titles and silverware. Please call me back. And he, because he is a League Managers Association, he knows a lot of people, obviously, so he's just literally phoning around everyone he knows, trying to get something happening here. I mean, when you take it back to the things that were said by the board and that we thought were insulting and contemptuous, we thought they were insulting and contemptuous while we thought there was a functioning system in place.
Yeah.
So they were saying those things, knowing full well there's nothing there. There is nothing there. There's nothing behind the scenes. It's just, there's a couple of guys on scouting. There is just nothing happening. And to call it a football department would be, an absolute joke. It was Paul Tisdale and his laptop, and now it's nobody. And you've got guys coming in here doing, and this is why, Ange and Brendan Twice and, all the managers have been covering, as we discussed last week, good managers covering for them. So what it actually looked like was the board weren't very good at their jobs. When what we didn't know was the board were an absolute, utter catastrophe because there was nothing there, and it was all just the manager. It's all just the manager going, right, okay, I've heard about this guy, I've heard about this guy. Is whatever job that the board think they need complimented for doing over the last 20 years, that is done, that is over. Whatever you thought was working and you needed credit for, that is done, that is over. The game has moved on, football has moved on, systems have moved on. We are being overtaken by guys employing modern systems. We are, not only do we not have a modern data analytics system in place, we have none, not a thing. And what happened to the suite that Ange was supposed to have had, 30 grand spent on? What did they just do, renovate an office and not put anything in it? Do you know what I mean? Is that literally what they did? Because there doesn't appear to be any data analytics at all. And I don't know. I'm pretty despairing at the moment, and not because, people are still quite relaxed saying, oh, we'll definitely get 3 or 4 or 5 in. Maybe. But there's been no evidence of that to date. The guys are under real pressure because there's very little time. Martin O'Neill made that clear. He hasn't had time to do the groundwork. He doesn't know who he's looking for. He's just phoning folk up and hoping for the best. Maybe they've got someone, maybe they don't. And it is, for a club the size of Celtic, that's supposed to be as professional as Celtic, the idea of professional, there's so many notions and bubbles that have been burst here. Just the idea, we projected what we thought were, a professional club should be onto them, and we assumed that's what was happening behind the scenes. I remember when we signed Engels and Ida, and I thought, that's great, we're now signing guys with potential for a bit more money, maybe we can crack on from here. And again, that turned out to be another horror show behind the scenes. Excuse me. So, oh man. Look, there is a few weeks to go. We do get the right people in, we can turn this around, but good grief. This is what an embarrassment, what a humiliation. And how heads haven't rolled in that executive team is beyond belief.
The thing, John, I keep going back to is you're saying there how we were projecting what we thought a situation was behind the scenes. It was much worse than even we suggested. And sometimes when you suggest it, particularly in times of success, you're called negative for daring to suggest that there's issues at the football club. But this has laid it bare. This has ripped the curtains down and said, look at the suite, John. Look at this suite. They're still using pagers in that suite. And I sometimes wonder to myself, when did the rot set in? And I'm not even exaggerating here. You could probably go right back to the tail end of Martin O'Neill's first time in charge, right? Because obviously everybody knows Peter Lawwell comes in 2003 because we have chased this glory of doing something in Europe and we've spent a lot of money. And Peter Lawwell comes in and draws it all right back in and says we cannot have a wage bill like that, because this is basically a race to the edge and somebody's going to fall over the edge financially, and that someone was Rangers, and we pulled right back in 2003. So even when you look at the last few seasons under Martin O'Neill, our spend was nowhere near what it had been when he first arrived at the football club, and we needed something special because we just finished 21 points behind Rangers when Martin comes in. At that point we were not dominating Scottish football, nowhere near it. We'd stopped to 10. That was about it. And we weren't dominating anything until Martin comes in. But then after Martin O'Neill, you get a situation, Patrick, with Gordon Strachan, who has said, and I've asked him the question, he was quite happy to step away from the identification of players and the whole recruitment and scouting system. If the club were going to do it, he was quite happy at that stage of his career. Some managers would not dream of approaching a job like that, Patrick. Others obviously do. And Gordon Strachan has got a different relationship with guys at Celtic like Peter Lawwell and Dermot Desmond than fans do. So that's fine. Did it always work? Absolutely not. I mean, do we? Of course it didn't always work. And then you move on to the Tony Mowbray escapade. And I think under Mowbray, I mean, we've obviously got examples, and I've done this. There was a whole show dedicated to examples of players being presented to the manager. Strachan was happy with that. Paddy McCourt turned up, didn't even know who he was. Turned up at training, signed by Dermot Desmond. And then you move into the realms of Tony Mowbray, all the promises in the world. And Peter Grant talks about being in the car coming up to the Celtic, having done the deal. And all of a sudden they realise in a conversation in the car coming up, all right, when it comes to transfers, we're not going to get our way here. I think one of the signings they did have a say in was Fortuny. Didn't work out. But all these other guys, remember all the signings we made under Mowbray? These were club signings. We had a guy called Zheng Zi. Remember him? What did Mowbray and Grant know about Zheng Zi? Nought. Absolutely nothing. And it continued all the way through. But there has been periods, I think, where the manager has grasped a bit of control. And Neil Lennon's first time round, although there was loads of that type of signing, the Dudu Dahan type signing, Patrick, there was a clutch of players there that were identified by Neil Lennon and his team. I've spoken about this before. He was brilliant at pulling players from the Championship in England, for example. Other than Darryl Murphy, we had a good record, from Adam Matthews to Gary Hooper, Joe Ledley, Fraser Foster. Even we had a lot of good players from that area, from that region. But the club has been interfering since way back when, just at the tail end of Martin O'Neill's time in charge. This is how long this has been going on. But only now, every so often, we're showing up, but only now has it completely unravelled. It's like death by 1,000 cuts, Patrick. And then Martin O'Neill sitting there yesterday, looking a bit drained, saying to the guy who asks the last question, look, I need to start concentrating on Falkirk. I'll not be phoning anybody else today. To the point where it's like, didn't ask me another question about transfers. I've got a game tomorrow night, a very difficult game. And this is where we are. 20 years later, Martin O'Neill walks in and we're even less functional than we were when he left 20 years earlier. That's an abomination, Patrick.
It's impressive in a way. I mean, when the rot set in, it's hard to say. I don't know if you want to call it rot, but I think it's quite easy to go back to the Stephen Fletcher transfer or non-transfer of January 2009. Me and my dad must speak about this every single window. It's as if the guys running the club don't see the pot at the end of the rainbow. It's as if they don't understand the money associated with the Champions League. They refuse to risk 3 or 4 million quid with the potential of getting an upside of 25, 30, 35 million quid, which is what it is now. It's as if they can't comprehend that maths, and that was obviously the case with Peter Lawwell in January 2009. I think it's always difficult. I mean, there's a lot of luck in football, and it's sometimes teams get lucky and sometimes teams don't get what they deserve. Obviously, we had a brilliant spell under Martin O'Neill up until 2005. Strachan does 3 in a row, and then of course Rangers do 3 in a row, and so it's easy to point to that as where the rot set in. But you don't know how lucky Celtic got in different periods, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying Strachan was lucky, but we could have been unlucky in say 2009, 2010, whatever it is. So the failure to speculate, to accumulate, I mean, I know in 2003 when Lawwell came in, he obviously had to revolutionise the finances because we were taking losses, and that isn't sustainable. And it's good that we decided to become a sustainable club, but you can't put that above everything. You can't constantly have this massive cash surplus of tens of millions of pounds. You do need to go out and spend. It's ridiculous. It's like an accountant's wet dream, running Celtic. So it's easy to point to 2009, but
You
then
just gave
come
me a vision with
2012.
Chris Mackay I didn't want to have in my head. But thanks for that, Patrick.
Well, he's got a promising career as a photographer if all goes tits up, you know. But I mean,
And it is.
2012, 2012, belly up, I should say. 2012, I wouldn't call it a rot, but certainly a malaise, and it's as if we didn't seize the opportunity in front of us. I mean, you can say that McInnes gave Ronnie Dyla a bit of a run for his money, particularly in the second season under Ronnie, but you know, we basically had a guaranteed chance at Champions League money 4 seasons in a row, and we squandered it. And then again, you get a fantastic manager in, pretty much basically because him and his family are all massive Celtic fans, and Brendan Rodgers, you get back in the Champions League. And then again with McGinn, you squander it again over 400 grand because Lawwell and Rod Petrie didn't get on. And then, of course, our shaky foundations, our foundations built on sand, are laid bare under Neil Lennon in the COVID season. We again luck out with Ange, we again luck out with Rodgers. So where the rot set in, you could go all the way back to 2009. But as you say, maybe we were just sort of, striking with such a good manager, and he was presented with decent players that we did sort of get away with it. And even under Neil Lennon, you had John Park involved for a lot of Lennon's spell.
Yep.
And we did bring in some good players, even foreign players, guys like Wanyama, even guys like Beaton. I'm no fan of Beaton, but he was certainly quite good under, I think, Ronnie and the early parts of Brendan Rodgers' first spell. Even guys like Chris Commons, Gary Hooper. I think Gary Hooper was a bit of a steal, wasn't he? From League One or League Two. So we have
Commons as
had
well.
good
300
transfers.
grand. 300 grand for Commons, Patrick. Unbelievable bit of business.
Amazing. I think he scored 34 goals from midfield in Neil Lennon's last season, first spell. So we have had good transfers in the past, and you actually look back on it, you would bite your hand off for a sort of 2012 John Park, based on where we are right now, sort of agent recommendations, be it Dudu Dahan, be it other agents. So I mean, where the rot set in, I think it's quite easy to point to January 2009, but then we've locked out so often with Rangers going bust, getting 2 top quality managers, Rodgers twice, to sort of hide and disguise things. Even working with Frank Trimbley when Ange was here, I mean, he was bringing all the players in practically, apart from Ange's, knowledge in the sort of Asian market. And again, we locked out with that agent connection. So now it's solely at the foot of the club. It's solely the club's responsibility, as opposed to these contacts and these, sort of top quality managers. And you can see just how poor we are at these things. So I think it's a sobering moment. And of course, in a way, we've got unlucky that Tony Bloom has come into Scottish football this season and shown us just what can be achieved with a club. I don't know Hearts' turnover, what is it, 20, 30 million maybe? Shown what can be achieved on such a low budget when we've got 77 million in the bank. As John said, I mean, I think it really is up in the air. I wouldn't be backing us at all if we don't sign a striker. And if we do lose the league, as John says, Rangers are quite, whether it's Hearts or Rangers, but if it is Rangers, they're quite likely to go straight into the Champions League, get the 30, 40 million up front, and then that 77 million that we've saved for a rainy day, that's squandered. That's gone.
It's bucketing down at that point. Yep.
Aye, and at that point, you've got ruthless American capitalists up against Michael Nicholson, essentially, come the summer, and that is not a fight that I fancy Celtic winning.
He's just shrugging. It's like that. What's going to happen then? He shrugs. But the problem I've got with this one is that Martin O'Neill, he knew he'd had a look under the bonnet first time round when he's come in. He knew pre-Nancy that the way we were operating wasn't fantastic. But he didn't have to concentrate on transfers because a lot of people are saying he knew what he signed up for. I don't think he knew the extent of where we were. you would expect to walk into a club who's compete or trying to compete in the Champions League on a regular basis, and you would expect all these things. Data analysis isn't something that's new. I mean, what I would say, right, there's a tremendous, Where's the Money Gone? It's a podcast, right? A tremendous podcast. And I've got to recommend that you go and listen or watch, because it's on YouTube as well. The latest episode, David Lowe's on it. David's been on this show a number of times, and he's basically talking to people who have got an interest in Celtic, but David is educating them in where we are and how we kind of got here. But there's a couple of elements that we certainly haven't touched on when we've been speaking to David that are presented by the two guys on the show. It's called Where's the Money Gone, right? And they talk about things like, John, and I guess that we get into that trap of just saying, oh, broadcasting's rubbish. Yeah, we know the broadcasting deal's rubbish. But what they explain is that there's a lot of the deals now that are absolutely frittering away when you look at the size of the deal, and it's balancing out across a lot of Europe. A lot of European football leagues are now not going to be able to rely on the mega bucks that they were getting before. France was mentioned, Belgium was mentioned as well. And what they were talking about was in order for a team like Celtic or any of these other teams from kind of smaller nations to then catch up, what you need to be doing right now, because the landscape is changing, what you need to do right now is get your house in order. So what can a club like Celtic do? Well, they can expand. They can expand the stadium. Oh, wait a minute, John, we've been banging that drum for about 5 years. They can expand the stadium because the fan then becomes king, and not just in Scotland, but in other competing nations. The fan income becomes king. That income stream is far more important than broadcasting, because the broadcasting money's down. Yet we're going to be at the tail end of it again, John, because we have no foresight. We can't even see it. I mean, I would forgive myself for not knowing the landscape of broadcasting deals in European football, but Celtic should know that. Celtic should know what's going to come in the next 3, 5, 7 and 10 years, John, but they won't. They absolutely won't have a clue about that.
No. I mean, the image in my head at Celtic this year is basically the Wizard of Oz, when you've got some boy behind the curtain huffing and puffing into a voice trumpet to try and bluff his way into being the almighty, all-powerful Oz. And that's effectively what we've got. We have guys who have been bluffing us. So guys who, and that'll be why it was so easy for Tisdale to do it, because, bluffers are susceptible to bluffers. Someone else has already said that, right? So, but bluffers are susceptible to bluffers. And, they were looking for Tisdale to produce miracles on the cheap. And it was never, ever going to happen. And that's how he was able to con them. He saw his mark. He saw guys who were looking for a miracle for very little money, and he was able to con them. And because we won't accept reality, we refuse to modernise. Dermot Desmond never wanted a director of football model, because that director of football would then almost certainly have final say on transfers. But there's not a director of football worth his salt would come here, because a director of football is supposed to be directing a department. What department? Do you know what I mean? It's 3 men and a dog. You just be walking into an office and there'll just be tumbleweeds blowing across because there's nobody there and never has been. It's such an absolute sham. And we are, and you're talking about, not only do we need desperately, very clearly, a director of football to come in, and if there is still no department, to create a department. You think back on what they've been done and all the praise that Lowell has got. Yeah, look, fair play. He stopped us going down the same path as the Rangers, the originals. And that's fair enough. Well done for that, and again, since then, everything has changed. The whole marketplace has changed. The money in the European football has changed. Everything has changed. And Man, if you look at the likes of people would say, you know, how did we manage to keep hold of Henrik Larsson for so long and all the rest of it? Well, because the money wasn't that different back then. You know, I mean, there wasn't, you know, it hadn't gone stratospheric the same way it's gone now.
John,
You
can
know,
I just jump in? Because
yeah.
that's a brilliant point. Henrik was on that overlap last week, and
Yeah,
obviously a lot
great.
of people were chatting. But I was talking about his contract, the contract that kept him at Celtic when you had that initial interest from Man United. We gave him 38 grand. That's why he stayed. 38 grand a week. We are, if you're lucky, paying one player that 20 years later, 20 odd years later. His contract when we kept him from going down to the Premier League in England was 38 grand, because that's the kind of contract he'd have been offered down there.
Oh, dearie me.
And that
so
was
bad.
way back. That was way back then.
That is so bad, isn't it? I mean, we are not only we're not paying the transfer fees, we're not even paying the wages. And apparently Chris Mackay wants to slash the wage bill as it stands.
It can start with his own.
Yeah, that would be useful. That would be very useful. So, I mean, not only have things changed, not only things changed like 10 years ago. So as soon as Rangers died, everything changed for us. But rather than look with vision as to where we could be in the future, it was all about just how do we stabilise now and how do we make sure we're not losing now and how am I still getting my bonuses and all the rest of it. And the opportunity cost there, was it Alan that was talking about this the other day? You think about how many tens of millions we have lost by not spending a few million in order to get into the Champions League, and the amount of embarrassing defeats that we've had, and it's just completely unacceptable. And you know, it was bad enough to be patting yourself on the back for that and thinking you'd done a great job, when all you'd managed to do is accumulate this vast sum of money. And now with this vast sum of money, we are in a position where we are desperately scrabbling about for loan moves in order to try and salvage this league so that the tide does not turn against us, and we are suddenly battling a resurgent Rangers. And to be in that position from where we were or from where we are, I simply do not understand, and I mean, how even Dermot Desmond can be blind enough to allow this to continue, you know. But any sort of significant change is going to involve him stepping back. Must involve him stepping back, and he doesn't want to. He wants to have the final say, and he's willing to watch the world burn just so he can have the final say on transfers. It is beyond pathetic. But look, you know, we have Martin O'Neill. Look, the one thing I'd say is Sean Maloney is at least connected to the modern footballing world. So, you know, maybe I'm projecting too much onto Sean Maloney, but I get the intention. I get the impression that he knows what he's about.
Yeah.
I think him and Fotheringham have both failed as managers, so there's no big egos knocking about. They are just trying to do the very best they can and prove themselves, trying to get behind Martin. Martin's working his socks off, and they have just been dropped into a completely outrageous position by this board. And come what may, if it doesn't work, if it doesn't happen, it's not down to Martin, it's not down to Sean, and it's not down to Fozzie. That's not who's responsible for this in any way, shape or form. Now, the one thing Martin did say is he hasn't been given any impediments by the board, which means, what that means to me is he hasn't asked them for anything yet.
This is it.
As soon as he does, he'll find out what the impediments are.
You know, there's also the belief, and maybe this is misguided, that the depending on the manager who's in place will depend on what we get done. Because there's a lot of people coming in saying, you know what, Ange managed to cut through all this nonsense, and he did. He absolutely did. Whereas a weaker manager doesn't. People then say, well, Brendan Rodgers wasn't weak. And I agree with that, but I think there was far too much personal issues behind the scenes, Patrick, with Brendan Rodgers and various other people, not initially Dermot Desmond, but that became an issue quite clearly when you read the statement, his parting gift to Brendan. But there was always that conflict of personalities, that clash of egos between Brendan Rodgers and Peter Lawwell. I mean, it's no secret, and it did happen. And anybody you speak to who has got any knowledge of what's going on the inside of Celtic will tell you that. You know, there was no love lost there. So they were battling against that, which means that things aren't going to be fluid, things aren't going to be harmonious. So I would say that Brendan Rodgers was a strong manager, but he was fighting against all that other noise in the background. Ange Postecoglou comes in, and John makes a great point. Frank Trimboli, CEA base, you know, we're still not dealing with them as an agency. We're still not picking up the phone to say, whatever's happened before, let's get over it. We need players right now because it works, Patrick. At the moment, right, other than Sean and Martin doing their absolute best, their utmost, and we've got a scouting team, but we're not scouting players right now. I mean, they might be looking at video analysis of players, but we're not scouting players. It's too late for that. So all the players they've been scouting were under a Tisdale model, which has absolutely been cleared from the decks, Patrick. It's ground zero, as the tagline says. We're starting from scratch. We're starting from the day Martin O'Neill's walking back into Celtic Park for the third time. That is a shocking indictment on what's been going on for a number of years. But this is where we are. And I'm of the view that you've just got to look at it and say, how do we sort it? Now, I said at the beginning of the window, 4 or 5 signings would have been the part 4 of how to fix Celtic. Part 1 being get rid of Nancy and Tisdale. Part 2 being bring back Martin O'Neill, Fozzie and Sean Maloney. Sean Maloney's now golden bollocks. You know, no one wanted him as a Celtic manager, but now his image is completely different. The third part of that, and I don't know where we are in relation to this, get the fans back in the ground. And then the fourth part was bringing 4 or 5. Now, see if we bring in 4 or 5 of the quality of someone like Araujo, but in the various different departments and positions that we need them in, I think we'll be fine. Because I do think we do have quality in the squad, Patrick. But if we bring in another 4 guys, 1 or 2 of them might be permanent. If the rest of them are loans, that's where we are. And I will feel confident. My issue with that is we're not very good, even if you identify the player. We're not even good, you know, if the manager is trying to pressurise the guys to get the deals done. Because there is that final hurdle, and that final hurdle is negotiating the deal, getting the deal done, and getting it over the line. So even if we get to the point of managing to identify all these players in a matter of a week or so, or 10 days, do you have the confidence we'll get the deals done? That's a massive stumbling block for me.
No, it would be the short answer. I think it's why you hear all these rumours of different agents, either coming in as a consultant or trying to help us out doing deals. I mean, you've seen it the past couple of years. Any deal that's allegedly imminent, it always takes that. It's always a few extra days, isn't it? It always takes a wee bit too long. And obviously we've seen it with Ida and maybe Trusty to an extent. It wasn't exactly a steal. I know you're signing them from top leagues and stuff, but it wasn't the steal that it should have been. So our chief negotiator isn't very good at negotiating, which is a bit of a you're sort of starting in the back foot there. But luckily, this is why I think it will be loan deals. I think loan deals are a lot simpler. I'm not sure what sort of say a player gets in a loan. I think they maybe get a bit of a say, but a lot less in a permanent move. Wages, again, you're not negotiating with a player, you're just negotiating with a club, I believe, based on how much of the wages you're going to cover, and then loan fees and stuff. So I think loans are slightly easier to get over the line. And obviously with their, as John has highlighted, our total lack of a department, never mind a shambles of a department, a lack of a department, you're basically working off of a list that Paul Tisdale has drawn up, and how much faith do you put in that list? Probably zero. So I think it will be loans. To be honest, I've not even thought about the wider squad. I've just been so focused on a striker. I think probably since Nancy came in, especially that Dundee United game, man. My goodness, our lack of a striker has really cost us. And even just getting a striker in, I think, would alleviate a lot of our problems, paper over a lot of our cracks. You seen it at the weekend. Again, not a vintage performance, right? But we won 4-0. You get guys in the score sheet like Yang, like Engels. You seen Arojo come into the team and then almost get sent off. But he looks a definite upgrade in Ralston. And as you say, even guys of that quality, I don't think he sort of set the head of a light. I suppose it's hard for a right back to do that, but I thought he looked a solid player, looked a decent player. Fast enough, good pass for the ball, solid, strong. So even guys of that quality, I mean, we do have quality in the squad. I think Tate's quality has gone missing recently. he's a shadow of his former self. But Engels is on the score sheet. Nygren, I mean, I sort of slaughtered Nygren at the start of the season. I just didn't think he was fast enough, either in decision making or in sort of bodily movements. But the amount of stats he racks up, I mean, goals and assists, absolutely incredible. So maybe he fails the eye test, but he certainly passes the sort of statistics test, and he's been a key player for us this season. So there is still quality in the squad. I mean, the old saying is that you're never as good or as bad as what you think you are. It feels like we're pretty bad at the moment. I don't think I don't think we've ever felt this bad in the last certainly 5 years, maybe 10 years. But I mean, there's definite quality in the squad. Jota not coming back to the summer's a blow. You don't know what type of player he's going to be. Johnston's out. Carter Vickers is out. Schmeichel's obviously had a really tough time, although O'Neill seems to be playing him. And again, I mean, we're now playing a system. We've got 4 at the back. We've kept a clean sheet. We look like we know how to defend again. You can't underestimate what confidence can do for a lot of these guys. It's a different dressing room now. It's a different attitude. So I think you're right. I think 3 or 4 guys in of a decent quality, and I think we probably will be fine this season. And that is obviously, from where we are, the first step. But again, looking forward, I mean, our lack of planning to lead us to this point. I think we spoke about it last Wednesday, John. How do you entice a manager into this situation? How do you entice a player into this situation? Who's going to be the manager in the summer? Don't know. What's the squad going to look like? Don't know. We're going to win the Champions League? Don't know. And of course, you've got guys running the club that can't get deals over the line. So longer term, I mean, there's so many issues still to be ironed out. But over the next, I think it's the 2nd of February, the window shuts. So, just under 3 weeks. Striker, number 1 priority, no doubt about it. And then, 2 or 3 guys to really supplement that. And hopefully, under O'Neill, we will be fine. But, longer term, obviously, there's far more many issues for us to worry about.
But I'm
looking forward to that come June.
Yeah, we have Patrick. The point you make there is everyone's making. We have 6 fixtures between now and the closing of the window.
Yeah.
We could lose the league in that period. We could sleepwalk our way straight into losing the league, right? And so, but the Celtic board, some people would call that a crisis, but the Celtic board are just chilling like a villain, so we'll be grand. And I would say as well about the confidence issue, for me, it's not just confidence, it's belief and relief. They clearly, and the stories were all coming out, and we're like, well, you can't believe them, they're not properly sourced, we can't. And then they just kept on coming, then you're like, there's something to all these stories, and then once he's gone, it turned out they were all true. Guy was 100% spoofer. And it was basically, he was telling them, look, my idea is I want to split the atom using this spoon. And they're going, all right, okay. How do we do that then? Says, well, you need relationships with the atom. You need relationships with the spoon. You need to create an overload round about the spoon and the atom. And I'm just going, what are you talking about, man? And I do tend to believe the stories about, Liam Scales calling them out before and after the cup final and all that sort of thing. And there was so many of them. So I think it's utter relief of having actual professionals back in the building. The same relief that, unfortunately, the people who are inspiring them to be relieved do not enjoy themselves, because the management team, who are now recruiting the recruitment team, are obviously they are having a similar sort of nervous breakdown as to the players had when Nancy came in. So they are now just like, how do we get people in the door here? How are we going to make this work? Who do we need? What loans do we, loans in this window in particular, you would think if we had any sort of functioning system, which unfortunately we don't, but let's hope Martin's phone calls can work, but there should be loads of guys looking for loans because the World Cup's coming up.
Yeah.
So there should be loads of guys desperate to get into their national teams and who want to move because they know they're not going to get playing time where they are. So surely, if there was ever a loan market that was easy or much easier to navigate it would be this one. But unfortunately, we're starting, this race from, it's a 100-metre race, and we're starting from 50 metres back. And we've already seen, we hate to say it, but we're already seeing some major moves across the city and in the capital. We're already seeing guys who look like serious quality being lined up, whether they come in and were successful or not. But, some of the names that have been lined up, we wouldn't be complaining about them. So to try and sort of diminish them because other people are signing them, I think says more about us. So we are really starting from a handicap. And can I just bring up the Slabburn Cabbage made a point here saying, can I ask PJD, Yogi and Young Patrick, do any of you think that investing in a first-class scouting and recruitment department that works independently from anyone in the club would pay for itself? 100%.
Yep.
There's just no question of that. And the thing about it is, that question is the answer to that question is so obvious. The question seems stupid, but yet nobody in the club has asked it. Nobody in the club has implemented it. And it's so obvious. How do we turn this around? How do we not get in this position every single transfer window? You put in place the systems and structures to avoid it ever happening because it's all dealt with well in advance. There's a reason why we are a joke around Europe and globally now. People won't deal with us. People are laughing at us, publicly laughing at us. And now we know why. And now, and people are saying that story about Kyogo, about the fact that we contacted the player first, and as soon as Birmingham found out it was us, they're saying, oh, that's just nonsense, that's just mischief making, there's no way that happened. Really? Can you be really sure about that, based on what we now know? So, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. And the story was obviously true, it was repeated multiple times. Michael Nicholson just didn't answer his phone to Chris Davies in Birmingham. When Yang was supposed to be moving, he did not answer his phone. That was how he dealt with them. And you just cannot get more unprofessional in life. That's like ghosting your girlfriend. He basically ghosted them. And it is so amateurish.
So typical of Celtic, though, John, at every single level and every department. Now, this is quite an interesting story that's breaking, I think, just prior to us going live. Michael brings it up. Fabrizio Romano reporting that we're interested in Datro Fofana. Let's have a wee look to see what he's saying to it. So this is his tweet right here, and this is obviously a player who massive high hopes for him when he was at Molde. He was at, and then he got a big move to Chelsea, 12 million euros. Apparently, we're interested. We've been thrown into the box there with Royal Antwerp and Derby County have all expressed interest over a potential deal, permanent exit. A permanent exit. That maybe rules us out, actually. So if you look at his career, it was Molde. Very prolific for them. Comes to Chelsea and has struggled for game time. Loaned out to a few clubs. Union Berlin, Burnley, Gostepe and Faith Karamagurk. Never heard of them. Sorry, guys. But he has obviously had a bit of a rough time since he goes to Chelsea in 2022. And he's looking for an out, as are the club. I mean, you bring in a player of quality. It's like, as I was saying there, John, you bring in somebody like Araujo, and is he better than the right backs we have available right now? The answer to that is yes. You bring in David Fofana. Where does he play? I hear you ask. So he's a centre forward. He might be the answer. Ivory Coast by nationality. He could be the guy that we're going for. Who knows? That's an interesting story breaking. There is usually something in it if it comes from Fabrizio Romano, not always. It was quite funny recently. I've been to these award ceremonies for a number of years, and every single year there's a short list of biggest influencer, and he's always in the final is Romano, and everybody else in there can just sit down because you're not going to win it. He's got about 28 million followers. And every time he appears on the big screen and apologises for not being able to be there, everybody in the room boos. Poor Fabrizio Romano. But you're never going to win that if you're up against Romano. However, who knows if there's truth in that? Let's bring
I did see that just before I come on, I was checking some stats, and I saw a story come up saying Celtic want Basel winger Philip Otelli who again I think is African origin, and apparently we're facing competition from the usual people we're facing competition for. 26-year-old attacker, Lazio, Bournemouth, Wolverhampton, etc. Apparently all in for it, which means we've got no chance at all. We're starting to be linked with people now. There's starting to be a bit more noise around. And even if that is just agents trying to generate interest in their players, at least it might, accidentally might put us in the market for them.
Yeah, and again, that quality player, John, is going to come to Celtic and improve what we've got, because what is he up against? He's up against Johnny Kenny and Shin Yamada right now. So you're looking at that and thinking, look, his career's maybe gone off the boil. How many players have? If his career hadn't gone off the boil, we wouldn't be in the conversation. So you've got to look at that and think, is he going to improve what we've got? 100%. Robert Duck reckons that Martin O'Neill looked tired. No wonder. He's doing 3 jobs at the moment. Robert Duck. Stephen Sloan says Martin looked so despondent yesterday. Maybe I'm reading his body language wrong, but his mood seemed low. Think he's as Scunner does us. Poor guys. One thing that he was very keen to do, Stephen, is get the focus on tonight's game. Let's not forget, with 10 minutes to go, in fact, 9 minutes to go, we've got a game tonight against Falkirk. And one thing Martin continually said during that press conference, Patrick, was how difficult it was going to be. This is a team in Falkirk that under McGlynn have been tremendous, have been fantastic. The work that they've done coming up the leagues, and not only just surviving, but they're in the top 6. And it's one of the games I'm looking at. I'm thinking, right, if you get a 1-0, get out of Dodge, I'll be happy with that tonight, Patrick.
Yeah, absolutely. Plastic pitch as well. One of the 3 teams are plastic pitch. That aside, though, I think maybe this is just me. They're quite a sort of likeable side. They've came up. I think they're 6th at the moment. They play half decent football. Nothing about Falkirk as a club, by the way. I've got no time for Falkirk as a club. But McGlynn and the squad that they've assembled this season, they've done quite well. They play half decent football. And I actually think that's one of the things that might play into our hands. They are a bit open, a bit too open when they're playing against, sides better than them. A bit like Nancy. Nancy was too open for sides, totally inferior to him, leaving one centre-half at the back. But I think that might play into our hands. Obviously, the pitch goes against us. The fragility of our form goes against us. Our lack of firepower goes against us. But we're obviously still favourites going into the game. We've got a better squad. Even though he's not been in the game a long time, a better manager. But I think it will be a difficult game. It's obviously, a midweek night game in the middle of January, so that doesn't help things either. Conditions will be quite cold and tough. I fancy us to win, to be honest. Just the sort of the vibe that you get under O'Neill in the league. I think he's won every league game, won every domestic game. Only conceded 2 domestic goals, and both of them were penalties so far. So defensively, the opposite of Wilfried. Really, really solid defensively. So hopefully that continues. And whether it's 1-0 or 4-0, hopefully we can sort of keep on rolling, get a bit of a run together, because obviously we've got Bologna. We've got Auchinleck, Bologna, and then Tynecastle and Utrecht. So as John said, you've got some really, really important games this month, and this is again just sort of the start of it. I can't really see us dropping points, to be honest. I don't know why. I think it's just O'Neill coming back. There's a sense of, not invincibility, but a sense of strength has been sort of renewed in the squad. And as I say, Falkirk are quite an open side. So I'm sort of semi looking forward to it, which is not a feeling I'm used to going into Celtic games recently. But I'm kind of looking forward to watching the game tonight. And obviously, I'll be cheering on the Paisley Pandas as well. Hopefully pick up a few points in the capital.
Yes, we do have the Paisley in their honour in the background here. John, it's sold out this evening. It's going to be a tough one, but there was 2 words, and I've mentioned them before. Callum McGregor used them after the victory over Dundee United, and it was confidence and clarity. And I think that's what Martin O'Neill brings to the Celtic side.
Well, the worrying thing really is that McGlynn is talking about a free hit because they've sort of secured their Premiership status. And he's just saying to his boys, go out and have a go. Now, from our point of view, he's turned them this year into a counter-attacking side. And, if this was under Nancy, I'd say we could be banging trouble, but I think we're far less susceptible to the counter-attack now that we've brought some sensible tactics back on board. So again, what we saw at the weekend was what we have come to expect over the years. There are teams that we should be putting away comfortably, just based on relative incomes, etc. And the relative strengths of squad. There are teams that we should be putting away comfortably. We have all sorts of issues in this squad, the main one being up front. However, what we saw at the weekend there was quite close to Ange ball. It was, it wasn't quite the Martin O'Neill humping a long ball, and it wasn't quite the sort of Wilfred Nancy, gung-ho charge of the Light Brigade. And it wasn't the horseshoe of death. So, it was really quite good. We played a lot of really good football. Some guys look tremendous again. It is genuinely astonishing how some guys look completely different under different managers. Engels just looks like a different player. It's ridiculous. And any system we can play in which Engels looks like the £11 million player he was, that's the system we should play. No, that's what we should do. And Yang has just been a revelation. As I said last week, that's a nobody's bingo card for 2026. Yang's the guy you're looking to in the close, in the window, going, oh, we can't sell him. He's the best. He's the most potent attacking threat that we have. And as Patrick said there, Nygren just keeps turning up. And the frustrating thing about Nygren is he has a lot of flaws, but he's like I don't know, he's like a boxer that's easily sort of pushed around, but he's famous for getting lucky punches in. But he always seems to be in the right place. He gets himself in the right place. He creates things for other people, and for all of his other flaws, I would suggest his flaws are less than the flaws of Hatate at the moment. And for me, he should be starting. Again, we've got no choice but to persist with Dyson up front because the options just aren't there. And to be fair, Taneke was pretty decent again at the weekend. If we had a centre forward worthy of the name, then he would have plenty of assists. But Dyson was very annoyed. Obviously, he was raging. The way he lashed in that ball, he was raging because he knows he had a poor game and he hasn't been on a great run of form. His form has been generally quite poor. So that must be frustrating him, especially because he is staying here. The only reason he's staying here is to get in the World Cup team, which he still is in at the moment. But if his form doesn't turn around, he probably won't see much game time at the World Cup. So, look, should we have the team to beat them? Yes, but that has been the case in the majority of games this year. And we've lost plenty. So I am, however, in Patrick's camp, I'm really quite confident about this one. I am looking forward to it. I am looking forward to see if it develops any from the other day, and hopefully it's not just the fourth manager bounce that we got at the weekend. So hopefully that will continue, and they've had a good few days training, and we can put this one to bed quite handily and quite early. I do prefer some early goals, nice and relaxed, and enjoy the game, But I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's 9 wins out of 10 for Martin O'Neill. And this is, again, if we listen to everything that we've spoken about today, had Martin O'Neill been in charge of this club all season, the club behind the scenes would have thought, that's fine, but everything's okay because he's grinding out results. He's maximising what he's got at his disposal when we all know things are not okay. And we're focusing right now on the recruitment, but there's other elements of the club that we have mentioned in the past that need to be addressed as well. It's just that right now we're focusing on recruitment. The stadium, not fit for purpose, has to be improved, has to be developed. Without a doubt, the academy doesn't produce footballers. That needs to be looked at. The communication, John, they don't even answer their phones. The communication is absurd when it comes to this point. Another wee point I would say, if you go to that podcast, Where's the Money Gone? You'll find it on Spotify, Apple, iTunes. YouTube, etc. And it's got David Lowe on it, and it's very, very good. As they made a point in relation to, and I was absolutely unaware of this, but obviously Midtjylland, I feel as though they've came out of nowhere, Nordjylland, and what they've done is they've got they've been engaging for a long, long time in programs that allow African players to come to the academies of the aforementioned teams. One of the systems is called the Right to Dream, and they were talking about how that is now coming to fruition all these years later. And David pipes up and go, "Oh yeah, I know the guy who's behind the Right to Dream, and we pitched that to Celtic and they weren't interested." So you just know every single time that there's something that's working. At some point, anybody who's involved in it go, "Yeah, we did run it by Celtic, but they weren't interested in that. Never going to work." Listen, thanks every single one of you for getting involved today. 4,100 frustrated Celtic fans hoping for a centre forward. Is Bowie the man? Let us know if you think he's the answer in the comment section. Maybe he's not. Maybe Fofana is. Let us know in the comments what you think. All that's left for me to say, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and come back half an hour before kick-off tonight, because we will be doing our pre-match. Thank you once again to Patrick and John for joining me on a Celtic State of Mind.
Here we are.